Marketing Minutes again. This is Nick Agafonoff with Rigas, Harbilas, and today we're going to be talking about corporate reputation. There's a growing trend for consumers to punish corporations for small errors and incompetencies. The Optus outage in Australia is the latest example of this phenomenon. So we're going to be asking what is causing this consumer rage and how do corporations combat it from a marketing and communication viewpoint. The second topic that we're going to talk about today is electric car sales. Electric cars for a while have been marketed as aspirational or an ideological or a rational choice, or all three. Despite all the advertising and marketing for electric cars, it appears sales have begun to slow. Why? What does it say about attitudes, about the economy, perceived value and identity? Finally, today, we're going to be talking about beer ads. They have always been iconic in an Australian context. You've had your hard-earned thirst needs a big cold beer ads from VB over the years. I need a Tooheys or two. In 2010, there was the Carlton Big ad, which was enormously popular. What do we make of the new Tooheys New ad that seems to have arrived out of a time capsule from 1975? So we'll be looking at that specifically today and analysing it. We recently had the Optus outage in Australia, and I was actually watching the cricket. Maxwell had just scored a double century. He was interviewed, and then suddenly everything went down because I was watching Foxtel, Fox Sports on my laptop. Everything went down. The internet suddenly didn't work, and there was an outage. And I didn't know what had happened. I dropped the kids off at school that morning, went to the fruit shop, and the fruit shop was full of people. And I asked somebody, what's going on? And everybody had said, oh, there's been some sort of a hack into the Optus system, and the whole Optus system is down and nobody's got the internet. I went to Bunnings after that, and that was full as well. And people were out and about because they weren't following their normal internet routines, I guess. But this became a huge story, and Optus was out for most of the day. And what you also had was you had this trotting out of people onto the news channels, particularly politicians. So our Deputy Prime Minister came out onto the news, as well as the Communications Minister, and they both immediately went for the jugular with Optus, demanded that they provide, an ongoing update of what was happening, explain to people what was going on and what they were doing, and that people should be compensated for the loss of their service for this period of time. So it became a very big deal in a short period of time. Obviously, it was very serious for, institutions and services like, health services, for instance, and it was incredibly inconvenient for a lot of businesses and people in general. But since then, you've also had a continued backlash towards Optus. You've had the Optus CEO having to be guarded by police as they make public announcements or go to public hearings to account for what went wrong. And I personally am an Optus user, have been since I was 18 years old. I was contacted by Optus, and they were prepared to send a person to my house this week to discuss with me about how my internet could be improved. It turned out to be a bit of an upsell to a more expensive service, but it was interesting that they were prepared to go to that level of customer service. So over to you, Rigas. Let's talk about corporate reputation. What is happening here? And why are we so focused on corporations and these small errors and incompetencies?
As as we speak, Nick, you and I are both on the Optus network, and we're breaking up. You're breaking up a little bit here. It's I'm on Vodafone on the mobile network, and that same morning Vodafone was out as well. Right, I don't know if the two were linked, but there was a basic communication sort of meltdown as well. So I don't know if the two are related or not, but nevertheless. And breaking news, Nick, breaking news this morning, Optus CEO has resigned effective immediately. She was being asked by a senatorial committee about a technical outage. Yes, it was for a number of hours, but it's a technical outage. Power goes out, water mains burst, infrastructure breaks. You know, infrastructure has to be repaired. Yeah, but the question is, why did we react so violently against, and the media as well, of course, so violently against the CEO and the corporation? We know who the big CEOs are in this country now. We know the Twiggies, we know the Gina Rineharts, we know the Alan Joyces. You know, there's others too. You know, we know them. They're not these boring people in suits who'd never have seen and are, you know, there to run captains of industry, you know, regardless of gender, captains of industry who run companies, et cetera, et cetera. Used to be a quiet thing. Corporations used to be quiet. Yeah. They used to be in the background. They used to sell their stuff. It used to be very, very quiet. And now it's become very loud. And the CEOs often act as types of politicians. Wielding power, you know, sparring with politicians, sparring with the public, when in fact, I mean, it's a crazy situation. They're in a situation where they're supposed to be serving the public, making products that make us happy, and we part with our money, and they make profits as a result of making us happy, giving us what we want, right? That's how it all works. Why have we lost so much trust? Is it because we are flooded with more information than ever as consumers? We can just see, you know, all of the critiques, everyone's got an opinion. You know, you heard it was a hack immediately. So because of what happened last time. So the consumer perception about corporations has been completely altered from, you know, these quiet organizations that basically supplied us products to now corporations that are far more in the public eye, are far more involved in social life and politics. And as a result, I think are bearing the brunt of actually operating in that political arena rather than. Now, the problem with technology, of course, it goes down and everyone loses their communications nowadays, and it becomes a big deal. But look, the CEO stepping down over it. What is the CEO supposed to step down over every technical breach?
It's not just corporations. It is, you know, governments as well, and other organisations. A number of personalities, and I think it's fair to refer to them as personalities, not just administrators, but a number of personalities come to mind recently that have lost their jobs. There's Alan Joyce at Qantas, you know, who was this extremely high-profile individual. He got into the political space as well. Qantas was right behind the gay marriage referendum, which was successful. You know, he's gone out from his job, very, very unpopular individual within Qantas and beyond, seen as somebody that has been incredibly privileged in the amount of money that he has earned as the CEO. And, you know, and once again, you know, there's been a backlash against him as Qantas has declined in terms of its sales in the last couple of years. Then you've also got the Rugby Australia phenomenon. They had their first female CEO, Raylene Castle. And once again, there was politics involved. One of their players, Israel Folau, posted something about his religious views that was perceived as being homophobic. Raylene Castle was forced to step in and disown Israel Folau. You know, there was a massive payout to that player behind the scenes, and that was the cost of having to put space between Rugby Australia and Israel Folau and that values. And, you know, it's interesting that also Qantas was one of the major sponsors of Rugby Australia at that time. But you've also got the Reserve Bank of Australia. So recently, the head of the Reserve Bank of Australia was criticised for continuing to increase interest rates beyond what was palatable. Philip Lowe recently was forced to resign. He's been replaced by his deputy, who seems like a carbon copy of him in terms of outlook and experience. And she has, of course, continued to face interest rates. So whether or not replacing him made any difference whatsoever to the function of the Reserve Bank is a mystery. And that's the thing. These are mysteries to most people. What happens in these corporate boardrooms? What happens at the CEO or administrative level, at that high level of corporations and governments, is a mystery to lots of people. And not just that, I think in recent times, when you see a world in which there are these monolithic, huge organizations that have such influence on our lives, that create these miracles, as you put it, things like the internet, clean water, a legal system, all of this infrastructure that makes our world so comfortable, there's a disconnect, and there's also a level of suspicion around how all of this works, because it's impossible to have it as a lived experience. Our only lived experience is the end result. And when the end result is less than perfect, the alarm bells go off. It's an instinctive response.
There is a total disconnect between the collaboration between consumer and producer than there used to be, right? So, we now criticize oil companies for giving us petrol. We're criticizing the telco that is enabling us access to all parts of the globe. If we could get Freudian about it, are we seeing them as a kind of top-down parental figures, or do we see, or are the CEOs object of envy, potentially? These people earning vast amounts of money don't care about us plebs who have to use their dodgy end product, that sort of thing, If
you actually engaged with working class people, they would be the ones complaining least about these issues. Working class people tend to have an attitude of just getting on with it, just dealing with it, get the job done, etc., etc. The people that are complaining most are new affluent groups. So affluence tends to breed greater expectations, greater aspirations. And then from a psychological point of view, you could also argue that it creates a level of self-centeredness. You tend to care less about fundamental things and appreciate fundamental things less, and you start to move up the Maslow hierarchy in terms of your needs and think about things like ideological aspirations, identity issues, those sorts of things. So my belief, my position on this is that what we're seeing here is as a result of becoming a more affluent society and as a result of affluence in general.
I think what you're saying is that we're spoiled. We're like we reach a level of affluence where we take on the psychology of a very spoiled young child who isn't getting 100% of what they want from mummy or daddy, in which case this might be Optus, or we're embarrassed by mum and dad, which case might be British Petroleum. We're embarrassed. You know what I mean? So have we regressed? Has our society regressed to the level where consumers are now basically kind of very, very spoiled, not even adolescents, but tantrum throwers?
Our grandparents built the institutions that we rely on now, the governments and the corporations and the public services were built by our grandparents. So they appreciated it, right? They were there to actually build those organizations, and they built them on firm platforms of values, of things like integrity and hard work and mutual respect and all those things. But now we're 2 generations, 3 generations on from that. And what we have are people that have inherited these, right? So they've inherited, they haven't had to work for them, there's a sense of entitlement there. There's that word entitlement, which is spoken about unpopularly by certain individuals in the public sphere.
And to the point where probably a very perfectly competent person, CEO, who could lead that company from a business perspective, has to step down purely to satisfy the whims of a very, very spoiled public, and of course also a bunch of senators who are grandstanding, who are using senatorial inquiries to grandstand and go for the easy blood. Go for the easy corporate blood. Put them in front of us and we'll tear them to shreds and the cameras will be there. And
I mean, I was watching the news that day because I obviously wanted to find out what had happened with Optus. And, you know, when the Deputy Prime Minister came out and just started ripping into Optus. And I just...
It's crazy.
Why isn't the government offering Optus help? You know, why aren't they coming out and saying, all right, we're working with Optus to solve this problem? But no, it was like, Optus is the problem, go for the jugular, let's deflect any kind of attention away from the government and put it all on Optus.
Ultimately, our diagnosis here is that the problem with corporate reputation is not necessarily the corporates, but by the changing, spoiled psychology of the extremely affluent voter.
Many CEOs and heads of organisations now are public figures. They're celebrities. They have a Twitter account. They regularly put out press releases.
Right.
You know, they enjoy this level of cultural elitism. My thesis is the people that are envious of that are not the working class people. All right, the people that are envious of that are the nouveau riche, what we used to call the nouveau riche, and the established middle class and upper middle class. You know, they're the ones that are envious of the next level of economic and cultural elite.
And that is exactly the way that class warfare, if you like, if you want to call it that, be a Marxist and call it class warfare for a second. That's the way it works, is that it is always the upper middle classes are the ones that aspire to the aristocracy, right? Always. It's the working classes do not, well, the working classes can aspire to the aristocracy, but that's all they're going to do, isn't it? They're never going to get anywhere close. Whereas the middle classes have got these trappings of the aristocracy, the fancy kitchen, the fancy car, like, you know, I've got a Merc just like Twiggy Forrest has a Merc, right? That sort of thing, right? So and it's debt, of course, it's all debt fueled. We borrow the money, right? It's all debt fueled. The upper middle class carries massive debts because of the aspiration to become aristocrats.
You know, I see Teslas driving up and down the highway here. They're beautifully designed. They look futuristic. They require hardly any servicing as well, you know, compared to petrol cars. But, you know, they are that pinnacle of aspirational and ideological, you know, like the saving the planet type of vehicle, but they also look so good. They hit that sweet spot, so to speak, for that aspirational group of people. However, despite all of this kind of marketing, design, production, distribution that has occurred around the electric car industry, we're seeing a drop in sales or a drop in popularity. Why is that? What is happening?
What you just said is the Tesla appeals to that aspirational type of person. The same person who we've just said whinges about outages at Optus, right? So that's really interesting. You made that comment actually, because I was reading or hearing about the inception of Tesla, and Tesla was created by two other people, not Elon Musk. I think Elon Musk came into it at some point later, but the two people who let's say created Tesla Motors did so apparently by driving around the suburbs, very rich suburbs in California, and wanted to understand what second cars and third cars were being driven by these large, exceptional, mansions and big homes with big garages and swimming pools, who already had, a prestige car and maybe a sports car. And what they noticed at that time was Prius hybrids populating those entire neighborhoods. And they realized that the electric car, the immediate future for the electric car was to design and produce a vehicle that would be primarily targeted at and bought by quite wealthy, upper middle class people, in a phenomenon called not conspicuous consumption, because conspicuous consumption is a modernist sort of dynamic, right? They called this conspicuous conservation, right? That's what they called it. They called this conspicuous conservation. Interestingly, the Tesla began its life as exactly the kind of vehicle that you have just described. But let's not judge it. We're not saying it. I'm not judging virtue signaling at the moment. We're just saying we're talking about marketing here, right? And targeting and target audience. And the initial inception of Tesla Motors, the target audience was exactly the aspirational classes. The target audience was not the working classes, the high-density apartment dweller. It wasn't, right? They didn't think about the car servicing those needs and those people. They thought about it servicing a particular strata, and it was an increasing strata in society at the time. The upper middle classes were, there was they were access to a lot of credit. Increasing property prices gave them access to a lot of money and a lot of credit.
One of the archetypal aspirations of cars was actually flight, right? And
yes,
with
yes.
the Tesla, it's taken flight to a next level. It's not an eagle anymore, or a bird of prey. It's effectively a spaceship.
Okay, I think you've raised there a very important issue of flight. Yes, flight, but more importantly, for people, it is the car has created a sense of freedom and complete liberation, right? That was the whole point of the car. The whole point of the car is you get in your car and you can just drive across America, drive across Australia, drive across Europe, go wherever you want, right? Freedom for the individual, right? And it was fairly cheap motoring at the time, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the archetypes of driving in the car is total and absolute and utter freedom. There are other ones, like you said, power, flight, all that stuff, right? But freedom is the big deal here, because our question is, why have electric cars stalled, sales stalled, right? And the answer is because they are not on yet, right? Yet. They are not yet on code with freedom, right? And the reason that I say that is, so why are these people buying them? These people basically were saying that these people who have a car or two cars already have their freedom. They've already got their status. They got a BMW, they got a whatever, they got a German expat, they've already got their status and they already got their freedom. An internal combustion engine car symbolizes complete freedom. I can get in and drive forever, right? Just filling up along the way, right? Easy. So these people already had status, power, and freedom wrapped up in their other vehicles. What they didn't have was this other thing. So they didn't need this other car to have any of that. And so this car is designed for people who have a garage, who can park their electric car in the garage, plug it into their mains electricity, refuel it cheaply from their own grid, from their own home if possible, and then use it for low-range city driving. In one of the countries where sales have declined the most is Australia, by the way. Because in Australia, we need our cars for this sense of freedom. We need to traverse large distances, the road trip, right? For God's sake, Alan's just launched a range of lollies called the Great Aussie Road Trip, right? Really hard to make the Great Aussie Road Trip at the moment in an electric car. It's for, if you live in Sydney and can plug it back in at home, they're great, probably, right? But until we can get this sense of freedom from the car, Australians at the very least cannot. It's not that they don't want to, it's just that they can't.
During COVID, we went into that lockdown mode and everybody all stopped traveling internationally. And then suddenly, you saw people buying caravans and going camping in their own state. And very much in terms of the mindset, it became about local travel and enjoying Australia and going camping and those sorts of things. And I believe that type of lifestyle holiday has really established itself since COVID. So you now have this commuting or traveling scenario where people are requiring a long road trip car again because Australians since COVID have rediscovered the long road trip, have rediscovered camping and caravanning. And for many people, also international travel is still out of reach.
You're 100% right. You cannot engage in that classic Aussie lifestyle outdoor type situation with an EV. They can't pull things. They run out of battery within a couple of hours when they tow stuff at the moment. You're in places where you can't recharge them. That's the issue. So when I say I can't be free with that car. I can't be free. I can't hitch up my caravan and go.
The sacrifice is that you're sacrificing a level of freedom, right?
Yes.
Right. So you sacrifice a level of freedom to have moral superiority, right? And that's always going to be an issue for people that don't have the BMW and the quadruple garage, that can't afford to use their vehicle as a virtue signaling device.
I don't even think it's about virtue signaling at that point at all. I just think literally is this car cannot do what I need a car to do.
On the topic of freedom, let's talk about beer. And beer ads. They've been so iconic over the years. I can remember as a kid seeing the VB ads, the hard-earned thirst needs a big cold beer. And, I wasn't 18 yet. I can tell you it had a big impact on me. And, even in 2010, there was this amazing ad, the Carlton Big ad, which became iconic that year. Very ironic. They had this army of people declaring Carlton, putting it into this kind of level of apotheosis that was ridiculous, but it really landed well with the audience at that time. What we have now is Tui's New putting out a new ad, and it really seems like it's a back to the future ad. So let's watch this ad, and then we'll dissect it from a marketing and communication standpoint.
Backs to the wall, you've given your all, but it could all go wrong. How do you feel? You're forced to get the team through, so you power on. How do you feel given all you got right at the final call? How do you feel? How do you feel? I feel like a two-way.
There didn't seem to be any irony in there whatsoever. It was completely authentic in terms of creating this world of the local community rugby player, the man, played for their team. It was a simple goal, which was to make a difference, not necessarily to score a try, just make a difference, and then to celebrate a win with the rest of the team in the traditional manner. So something very traditional here, very stripped back, very traditional also in the portrayal of masculinity as well. And I would say the only difference here is that it's reflecting demographic changes to Australia. So what we're seeing is a Pacific Islander Australian. The Greater West of Sydney, for instance, has huge population of Pacific Islanders from Tonga and Samoa.
My first reaction, especially when they hit the line at the end, I feel like a Tui's was really just a kind of first. My visceral reaction was to burst out laughing, right? Because it just seemed, having, of course, witnessed and grown up with all the other ones, it just seemed ridiculous. Desperate by the brand. I just immediately thought they've run out of ideas, and they've reached back into the success of the brand's past. I think they were Mojo, those ads, right? They were the people who wrote all those songs. Come on, Aussie, come on, and you ought to be congratulated, and all that sort of really famous. So forget the fact that it's a throwback, and just look at the ad for what it is, right? Just imagine I hadn't seen it, right? So what it's relying on mechanisms that advertising used to use that used to be very reliable and effective, which was the jingle. So the creation of the song, which is what made Mojo wealthy, and that was possible because everyone was watching one TV in the corner of the living room at the same time. Yeah, we knew what it was, yeah. So those jingles played again and again and again and again. And if you've ever worked with anyone, any producers in the music industry or how all that sort of stuff works, they call them earworms. But in order for earworms to work, it means you have to have a captive audience of people who are going to tune in and actually sit through the jingle, right? Whether it's in the car, whether it's in front of the television. And once they hear it about 20 times, it sinks in and it becomes like a mnemonic thing. Now, today, there is no vehicle in which the jingle can actually be effective. So no one's watching enough television. No one's going to sit through a jingle. On the YouTube ad where I saw it, I think it was a very, very short version of it before you could skip it. It was just the jingle, I feel like a Tui's. And so there isn't the context by which this music and this song and this jingle can infuse the public consciousness to act as a mechanism for mental availability for the brand, which is what these jingles did. And I mean, they did it incredibly well because the jingle songwriting was really, really good. If I could also make reference to the music, even though it's the same song, it's recorded differently. It has a different tempo. It just does not have the same light-hearted little skipping element that those Mojo songs did. You know, they had this really sort of, they weren't heavy or dirgy or anything like that. This song kind of dirges along, you know, as well. So it's kind of lacking that earworm effect as well. So it's the same song and it's the same ad. Socially speaking, for me, it's a complete throwback and a bit of an act of desperation. And it's really, really hard for jingles to work in the modern advertising environment, full stop. So even that's really, really difficult. And thirdly, the nature of the jingle as well is just probably not the kind of music and the kind of things that are going to kind of really work in advertising in that regard. So I could only really chalk it up as an act of desperation, and we've run out of ideas. So we're going to reach back into something that worked a long time ago, by the way, a really long time ago.
Well, and I think that they've got to be worried about the impact of this ad because it appeals to me. And you know, I'm a 47-year-old man that, you know, that sort of ad was popular with me when I was 15 years old, right? And that was an entirely different realm then. And, you know, and I'm not a big drinker anymore. So I'm getting a nostalgia trip, but without actually buying the product. I think it's a sign that there is this crisis with advertising agencies and strategies around using traditional or using the advertising template, television advertising template in the current postmodern environment. There's a confusion around how to advertise now. And there's also, I believe that there is some sort of a culture and attachment within advertising agencies. There's an attachment to that previous era when TV ads ruled and when it was really clear what their goal was, which was to make the big, great ad of the year, get the award, get the accolade, get the status. But unfortunately, the media landscape and the way that people consume doesn't align with that anymore.
And the other thing that we often neglect to mention about the way that we used to watch TV is what happens to people's brains when they were watching TV. So after a while, you enter apparently what is called an alpha state, where you're meditative almost. You know, you're kind of sort of almost unconscious, but you're watching and you're absorbing. And that is when people are at their most suggestible, when they are in the alpha state. And so therefore, firing ads at them when they're psychologically in a suggestible, vulnerable position works really, really well. That's what we used to call passive viewing. There's very little of that nowadays. People are skipping, they're changing. I'm reading comments while I'm listening. I mean, I watch YouTube. I watch YouTube for the comments, right? Right? I'm more interested in what the comments are saying than what the people are saying most of the time. You know what I mean? So it's kind of it's active participatory viewing. And we're all skipping the ads as soon as we can. Who's this targeting? Because Tui's new. I haven't heard of. I mean, Tui's new. There's so many. There's so many brands. This is the other thing that's happened since that ad, the early ads. The number of brands of beer has exploded exponentially since Tui's new ads were recorded by Mojo.
One of the laughable aspects of this ad is the assumption that the working class are still the same as the working class back in 1985 or 1975. Now, I belong to a soccer club in my regional area, and a couple of years ago, I hosted my soccer team barbecue at the end of the season. Probably about 75, 80% of my team are local tradespeople. They're working class people. Anyway, I made the mistake of getting a case of VB and a case of Tui's. And nobody drank any of it. In fact, they all went to the bottle shop and bought a whole bunch of craft beer. And I got publicly humiliated and scolded for getting VB and Tui's New for the soccer barbecue. It was seen as poor quality, as anachronistic, and didn't align with the values of my working class tradie mates who were regularly going overseas on holidays and, you know, had boats and all sorts of things.
The irony of the situation is that marketers, okay, we're generalising, you know, a guy who earns a lot of money, but yes, tradespeople can actually earn a lot of money. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a phenomenon at the moment, right? So people who are earning a smaller salary but are working in marketing are basically looking at working class people who are potentially earning a bigger salary, you know, and therefore have more disposable income than they do, and are trying to market those people what your mates call a low quality pleb type beer, given all the craft beers that are on the market. You see what I mean? So the irony of that, right? The irony of that is just absolutely amazing. And maybe that's why I kind of, like I said, the visceral reaction was to kind of laugh, kind of underneath what that visceral laughter reaction was all those things, was the throwback, was the irony, was how often have we said, the more that we in marketing try to put people in boxes and then present these boxes to these so-called people that we think believe in these, are in these boxes, you know, the worse things become. It's never on the mark, you know, in that regard. The irony is that demographic is much more cashed up than what we think, and is also consuming media in very much the same way that marketers consume media, you know, which is social media, which is YouTube, which is not watching much television, not watching much advertising.
I think what we've entered into is a goggle box type of paradigm. So instead of consuming ads in that passive, hypnotized way that we're used to, ads are just more content, right? More content for people as communities, as groups of individuals to analyze, to comment, to form dispositions around. And so it's not so much that people are interested in the ad as interested in the interpretive community response to the ad. So we go to the comments when we see an ad on social media or on YouTube, because we want to see how people interpret it. We want to understand their dispositions, and we want to find a disposition in relation to that content that fits with our own perception. And so it's just a completely different way of interacting and engaging with advertising.
The only ads that are having traction are the ads that are literally, like, as you've said, kind of somehow more content.